Hi everyone, this is Ryan with HUSNG.com, and today we're going to be reviewing play at the $30 level on the Revolution Poker Network. Jumping over to hand one, 9-4 offsuit. It's going to be a little bit too weak to call here out of position. Um, Looks like you have the ZZZ Hyper helper up as well, which is useful in 3-bet situations. Min raise here is going to be really standard with Jack-7 offsuit. Plenty strong to raise. I would c-bet on this board by default. Actually, looks like you have some stats on this opponent as well. So the flop c-bet's good. You get a lot of weaker hands to call you. The turn is not really an awesome card for you. I would just check back on the turn here. I don't think you're going to do a lot. You might fold something like a queen, but a queen is often going to check raise on the flop. Some weaker mid-queens may not, and really depends on the characteristics of your opponent. Some players would just slow play a lot of queens on this board anyways. Not slow play, but more passively play them. However, I just don't think you're going to be folding a lot that is beating you, and you're not going to get a lot of weaker hands to call you. You don't see a lot of weaker flush draws here call. I don't think you see 10x or 9x call too often either. So he min raises here. I would just get out. I mean, if you just check back the turn there, you get to the river. You have some outs to make a pretty strong hand. You have a 7 of clubs, which is obviously going to be the best shot. Just getting to showdown, I think with his hand is going to be a little bit better. I don't see a point or good purpose of betting the turn. Once he min raises you, I would just get out of the pot. Calling just another 70 with a 370 pot, it might seem kind of tempting because it's not too many chips, but I think you're beat here such a large percentage of the time. Yeah, I mean, if you hit another jack or something, or you hit like a 7, you might be tempted just to play a bigger pot. Obviously, with a club, you're going to have to play a bigger pot on the river to get it in, but with some of those other hands, if they improve a little bit, it's going to be tempting, and you're probably behind whether or not you hit something like a jack or a 7. So good fold after the bet, but I don't love the turn bet. 7-10 suited, I play that hand against a raise, definitely, but he open folds. Jack 8 suited, I would just go ahead and min raise in this situation. Ace Jack offsuit and these stacks, I would just stick it in. Ace King offsuit, I just min raise in this situation as well. You're limping, if you've seen the guy play really aggressive against your limps and he's not calling a lot of pre-flop raises, then this is a valid play. Otherwise, I would just min raise. If your opponent's calling a lot out of position, I think a min raise is going to absolutely be the best play with Ace King offsuit. Um, and even if he's not calling a lot out of position, I probably won't just limp it randomly. I probably want to see some sort of aggression from him. And a lot of times if a player is not really aggressive against a min raise with either 3-bets or he's not loose calling a lot, then he's probably not going to be super aggressive when you limp. So I just don't see a lot of situations where limping this hand is going to be good. But you show up with it. He shows up with a standard hand, Ace-7. If you would have min raised, it probably would have played out the same exact way. And it looks like he'll get you on this one, and we'll see if we can do a little rematch. It looks like we have a rematch here. And the open folds there against your Ace-2 offsuit. Ace-Queen offsuit, yeah, I like a min raise here. It's pretty typical raise. And see what he does. He was thinking, he just folds. He's open folding his button a lot, so I probably wouldn't be just thinking overall strategy terms. Hold on 1 second. I would probably not be 3-betting too much with weaker hands. I'd just be 3-betting for value at this point, and you see how he responds from there. Because he's already open folding a lot of his weaker hands pre-flop, so there's not going to be as many weaker hands in his raising range for us to bluff. Not as much fold equity. Okay, so 6-3 offsuit, pretty weak hand, but you're on the button and you're facing a guy that to me seems kind of a little bit passive, a little bit weak overall. Doesn't seem very aggressive, doesn't seem very strong in general. So I would go ahead and just min raise his hand. And you fold it there. So yeah, I think you missed an opportunity. I think min raising a pre-flop would be better than open folding it against this opponent based on what we've seen so far. Now he's raising 4x. It's a sign of kind of an erratic, strange opponent. I don't know why he would raise 4x, but You see guys do that sometimes with like their weaker ace type hands or some pocket pairs. They don't really know how to play them, so they just play them in a very weird, kind of non-standard way. So keep an eye out for that. Min raise with 8-7 offsuit, that's really standard. See about this flop, absolutely not a lot going on in this flop. He decides to lead against this opponent. I'd probably just call. He could have anything from a draw, a weak kind of gut shot draw, bottom pair or top pair. Obviously flush draws as well. So I mean, I'm not discounting anything from his range. We don't know a lot about him. Um, I mean, he could be bluffing as well, obviously. So I mean, I would just flat call here. You have middle pair, middle kicker. Um, just keep the pot manageable. Use your positional advantage. I don't see a lot of reason to raise at this point. Let's see what he does here. All right, so it looks like he checks to you. Yeah, I like a bet here once he checks. He could be checking a king, but I think it's a little less likely he has a king now that he checked on the turn. Some passive players will check a king in this spot. But I think I would bet just to charge the draws, because if he makes a mistake by calling a draw, if you bet something like 90 chips here and he calls with a gut shot or even a flush draw, it's a pretty big mistake on his part. He's not very likely to win the hand, and he's putting a lot of chips in the pot. So I would go ahead and bet there. Um, his implied odds are not that great either with a lot of the flush cards that come out, especially if they make a straight two. Something like a 6 of hearts comes out on the river. It's not going to be a card that you're probably going to play for stacks. So if you bet here and he calls and he does hit, he's not always going to get paid. So it's a really big mistake if you bet him here. It's a big mistake on his part if you bet and he actually calls. So I like a bet in this spot. I think his range is a little weak. I don't see a 3 calling really, but there might be a weaker 7. It's not really too much of a factor. I mean, there could be stronger 7s as well. So I mean, the 7's not a huge factor. It's just more of really charging draws, some kind of overcard bluffs as well, making them pay if they want to continue in the pot. You're probably folding out the bluff hands, but those draws, I really like to charge those draws in this situation because it's such a big mistake when a player makes that. And this is definitely a line, the bet flop, check turn, that can be played with the straight draw and the flush draw. A lot of different draws on this board. So see what happens here. I would call a bet here. Only 20 chips, I would call that. Don't know what it means. It could be him just taking a stab at the pot with a misdraw, a complete bluff. He could have, something like Jack 7 in this spot, or any 7 really. He could have bottom pair. It could be anything, pocket 5s, or pocket 4s, pocket 6s. I didn't mean pocket 5s. Probably not a super strong hand. I'd be kind of surprised if it was a king. So it's probably weaker than that, and you're certainly going to call for 20 chips. I don't like a raise here. I really don't like a raise here because he could definitely have a stronger 7. He could have hit a 10 on the turn, not as big of a chance. But I just think that, even if you do raise here, he might not call with something like a 3, even if he bets it this way, which is no guarantee at all. And I think you're beat sometimes when he has a stronger 7. He bets 20 here and you raise. So I don't really like a raise in this spot. I would just flat call. The raise is a little bit too thin. Oh, sorry, I didn't hit there. So he made 100 and he folds. So I think it's very unlikely, especially given the fact that he snap folded, that he had anything stronger than what you had. I think the raise is a little bit too thin, and I would have bet the turn instead. All right, so he open jams, queen 3 offsuit. It's a pretty easy fold. 8-3 offsuit. I would play this hand against him. He's a little too weak, I think. I really don't think he should be folding hands against him right now, until he shows us that he can, punish us for, playing some weaker hands. He's folding a lot of buttons. That's really good to see. You don't notice it all the time right away, but the opponent's giving up a lot of edge when they're folding a ton of buttons. It's their positional advantage, and there's a lot of hands in there that they're folding, so it's really good for you. A lot of charts up. I'd probably try to use the charts in my studying, not during game. It can be distracting during the game. I would just review situations, like I'm reviewing in this video, and use the charts and use, the programs and really review spots there. Some sites it's not even allowed to use them in game. You have to check with your site and see. 10-8 offsuit, a lot of times when you raise this short, you kind of have to call, and all in, you're kind of committed. But against this guy, I don't think he's that aggressive. Against a more aggressive opponent, I think you definitely have to call. It's kind of close, though, against a less aggressive opponent. We're really short stacked here. So he's min raising. I would just call it the king 2 suited. it might be a jam, but against a guy that's open folding a lot of hands, against a guy that I think is kind of weak post flop, I would call here, and I think I'd feel pretty comfortable playing it in short stacks post flop. So that would be my preference here. I don't think it's really a mistake to jam either. All right, so you bet 50 here. It's an interesting play. I think I would consider chucking and maybe making a play with a raise if I was to do that. I'm not sure I even like that move. I wouldn't consider this guy necessarily a great opponent, just because he was opening up 4x and stuff on the button, and he hasn't really played very aggressive. He's been kind of passive, so I wouldn't necessarily assume that he knows that we shouldn't have an ace in the situation. A lot of good players are going to say, hey, most of the time you're going to be three betting pre-flop with all your aces. So if you're check raising this flop, odds are it's some kind of bluff or some kind of a flush draw or even a flush. Um, you can't really have pocket sevens or pocket fives most of the time either. So there's not a lot of hands that you can have here that hit the flop hard. So players are going to call you pretty light when you check raise bluff. I think that's kind of the same when you lead the flop as well. I think I would just check here, and you're relying a little bit on the passive opponent to play passive when he has weaker hands. Not necessarily, it's not necessarily a sure thing that he's going to see bet something like a queen high on this board. So I would probably check here and just look for him to check back if he see bets. Unless it's like a min bet, then maybe I consider playing against it. We've seen the min bet. It looked a little weak before, especially since you folded your raise on that other board. So maybe if it was like a small bet, I might consider check raise bluffing it. But otherwise, I'd just check fold in the spot. It's a little bit too tricky. Remember, he's also folding a lot of hands pre-flop. So then you continue on the turn. I don't love that, especially it's half pot. If he has a flush, he's certainly calling. I mean, he might even call with an ace. He shouldn't, but you never know. This guy is certainly not playing. I don't want to say typical, but he's certainly capable of calling something like an ace in the turn here. It wouldn't shock me if he called down with an ace. So I mean, in this spot, after you bet two streets, I really think he has a flush a lot of times. It's like a middle flush, middle to strong flush, and you're just going to be betting into him. So I guess I would check at this point. I hate kind of checking the river after betting two streets, but I would have never bet the turn either, or the flop. So I just think this wasn't that good of a spot to bluff. So he bets 120. There's not a lot you can do there. This hand I would just min raise here, I think. If he jams, you're going to have to call it jam at these stack sizes. You limp. Limping is actually fine too. I don't know why I didn't consider limping in that spot. Yeah, I mean, I think limping this hand is also fine. It's going to play really well post flop. Yeah, and I guess this 3-bet percentage is a little bit. It's not super high, but it's not non-existent either. Now that you limped, it's 40 chips and 100. I would go ahead and call. 10-8 suited is a good hand. It's going to flop a lot of. It's going to flop pretty decent. You could have something like that A7 in this situation as well. We've seen him raise the A7 pre-flop. So this is a spot where I would definitely call. You're going to hit a lot of flops. He jams. You got to call, I think. 2 times the size of the pot. You have middle pair here. He just goes all in really quickly. If he has an ace, good game. He owned you. He raised pre-flop. He snapshot the flop. I think we have to call here. I'm not going to fold in this situation. And he's pocket 7. So, I mean, see what I mean? This guy, it's not exactly a standard play, just a snap jam, 2 times pot with 3rd pair on the flop. He probably doesn't know what to do. He probably calls this like something like a go and go. A lot of players, it used to be a popular term, kind of raise pre-flop and then just go all in on the flop. I don't know. I guess he turned his 7s into a bluff. But, it's a flop that people that are going to jam really quickly, I think it's going to be a bluff some of the time. Enough to call with your 10-8. There's too many chips invested in the pot to fold your 2nd pair there. Even though the ace isn't nice, you'd much rather see like a king high flop in that spot. But, you don't get to pick your flops. You got to play what's dealt to you. Alright, so this guy's, oh, we don't see the guy yet. Give it a second here. Oh, there we go. Oh, same guy. Alright. Now you're on the right side. Seating preferences? No? Okay. 7-3 suited, I'd fold against him. He's folding a lot of buttons, so you don't want to be too loose out of position. You'd be probably a little tighter than your average opponent. Not too tight, just because this guy doesn't seem that great post flop, doesn't seem that great in general. So I wouldn't tighten up, tremendously, but I would tighten up a little bit, your standard calling range. 6-4 offsuit. He'll probably fold that one too. It's just a little weak. I don't mind the call because you are it's just a little gapper. And again, this opponent's not that great post flop, but I think we'll probably lean towards a fold pre-flop, just because he's open folding a lot of hands. It seems like. Let's see here. So on this kind of board, I would just check fold. His open range is a little bit tighter, so it's going to hit this kind of board a lot. He's got a lot of those, 9-8, 9-7, Queen 9, Queen Jack, Jack 10, 10x, Jack X, whatever hands in his range. A lot of Broadway hands as well. So I would just kind of avoid this one, just check fold. One thing is, one thing against this kind of guy, you can play back on a lot of the low card boards, I think. And you have a lot of fold equity, because he's open folding a lot of those weaker hands pre-flop. It's fine that you just folded pre-flop there. It's a small raise, but we're not 75 big blinds deep against a weaker opponent, where we can call basically anything that he just 2x raises pre-flop or 2x 3-bets pre-flop, and see a flop and just know that we're going to be able to stack up for a huge pot once in a while, and it'll make up for all the times we folded. We're too short stacked to really get by on that kind of theory here, and I don't think his 3-bet range for 2x size is probably a pretty strong range of hands. So Jack 5 offsuit's too weak. Min 3-bet I would have called. Queen 10 suited is fine call. Against someone that is going to call 3-bets really light, you can 3-bet it for value, but I think a flat call is perfectly fine. Alright, and he just min-bets the flop and you called. I don't love it because you don't really have much of a hand here. You don't have, you have queen high. You don't really have any draws, no backdoor, nothing backdoor is really happening either. So you're not in a really good position the rest of the hand. So I don't love calling that min bet. I know it's a small bet, it's tempting, but I just don't see a lot that you can do here. And there's some draws out there, so if you decide to bluff him later on, he might hang on. He's got the positional advantage. We know he's willing to bluff a little bit sometimes, so I think I would just get out of it. You don't have to contest every pot against this guy. So now you decide to make a bluff, and it's tough because if he has anything, he's probably going to either stick it in or call you there. And he might even decide to call you with something like an ace. In position against the guy I've seen bluffing, I would certainly call there with an ace. We don't know we don't know a lot about this opponent, so we can't make those kind of assumptions, but I'd say he's certainly capable of something like that. And, again, not a great card because, hands like 10-9, hands like 9-8, hands like 10-8 that might have called on the turn. Now they hit second pair and they're not folding. You obviously fold out some kind of flush draw. It's around there. You're probably not folding out something like a 7 though. So see what happens. He calls. Yeah, 6-7. That's tough. So we see now that he bet with a small pair, a weaker pair. That's what he min bet with. So that's definitely a note. It's definitely a tendency you want to keep in mind. You're not going to assume that that's the only thing that he's going to min bet with, but a lot of times players are very transparent. So this kind of note is valuable that he just min bet the c-bet the flop with middle pair, kind of a weak kicker. So definitely keep that in mind. But I think you're bluffing a little bit more than you need to be against some of these guys, against this kind of opponent. All right, so we have a new opponent now, so we can't really take advantage of our read there. Just see what happens here. What we got here? Now we're at the $60 level. I hope you're not Martin Galen. That was a joke. Alright, and then raise with the 8s, pretty standard. Obviously stick it in if he raises here. I'd see bet this flop. There's enough draws and just, getting a fold and moving on. I think it's more valuable than checking back. No need for a free card. Betting something like 30 or 40 is fine. Yeah, I like 30. I like varying the bet sizes. Yeah, no need to go more than 30 here, to be honest. It's a good bet size. He just flat calls here. If you Yeah, I'm torn between the small bet and just checking back on this turn. You do charge some hands. There's a lot of draws out here that I think are to call, and get good odds, or you get you charge these draws, you give a good price. You get a lot of value in this situation against the draws. So 60, I don't mind 60. Checking back might be a little bit better. A lot of players are not going to be raising a queen here. A lot of players are just going to flat call a 9 as well. So But, 60's not bad. The players aren't going to play very tricky in this spot a lot of times. He's probably not going to raise a draw here. He's probably just going to flat call it. If he does have something like a 9 and he called the flop, he might decide to raise it on the turn. I think a lot of times opponents are going to play their hands fairly face up here. And you might get a really weak call like an ace high or a king high in this spot, so you can force some mistakes against some opponents. So I do like your bet there. It's a nice bet. Jack 7's a hand I would play against players that are going to min raise or obviously limp. It's a pretty standard min raise here against an opponent. The stack size, he goes all in, so I'm just going to go ahead and drop this hand. Got some min raise, I play 6-5 offsuit here out of position. A little bit deeper, a little bit better than your 6-4 offsuit hand. Obviously the disadvantage is you don't really know much about this guy here. Not a great flop here. I would just check fold in the spot. Not a flop you really want to play around in, I think. That's good. You didn't really hesitate, you folded. That's good. A couple bluffs in this video so far that I didn't love from you, so your name has been appropriate, but luckily you didn't take the bait and decided to bluff in that spot. Here's going to be a standard C-bet, I think. Just bet, 60 chips here is fine. 50 is fine as well. Something in that half pot range or just below is perfectly fine. See what he does here. He just calls. I'd fire out another bet here. Here you're really thinking in terms of stack sizes. How do I maximize the amount of times that my opponent's going to call 2 streets here and get it on the river with, something like maybe a 10x hand if you like 10-9 on the flop, maybe an 8x hand if he's really loose. You assume that most flushes are going to get it in no matter what you do here unless you go too crazy. So you got to think like something like a 90 chip bet is probably going to be plenty. That makes it a 400 chip bet. It makes it a 400 chip pot on the river if you bet 90 here, and he would have about 290. So I think that's probably fine. You could also go a little bit more, like a 110 type bet, 100, 110 type bet, and that would make it somewhere in the range of 420, 280. So 420 in the pot, 280 in the stack. So I'd lean a little bit more towards the 90. It feels a little transparent sometimes. I say it a lot probably, or I do it a lot when I'm playing, sometimes against unknown opponents, but it does make a difference. I think they're going to call a little bit lighter when they see a bet like 90 versus like 110 or 100. So, and it's not that big of a decision. I probably spent a little too much time going over the sizing here, but I do like to think about it in all areas, because in other spots it's going to be more important than it is here. So, 100's alright. I think it's perfectly fine. And he folds, so, he probably just had something like a pair or a draw without a flush, unlikely he's going to fold there with a flush. And stick it in here no matter what he does, the 9s. I mean, if he limps, you can make it like 80 or 90 or something if you want, 75 to 90, but getting it in pre-flop is really best in the stack size of the 9s against any action. Limping 6-5 is fine. I would just min bet this flop. I wouldn't slow play it at all. You want to get some chips in the pot right on the flop right away. It's a board that he's going to call with a lot of overs sometimes. A lot of opponents are going to call with just overs. A lot of opponents are going to decide to bluff. They're losing in this match so far. They got a small chip stack. It's a dry board. They've seen you bet a lot, so it might be a spot where they're going to play back a little bit more than average on that dry board. So it was a good C-bet. How are these min raise there? Yeah, I get min raise for value. If we'd seen him play a lot really aggressively against limps, but not 3-betting, then maybe I'd limp there. But I just like the min raise in general. Open jams there. It's going to be a pretty easy fold with the 6-3 offsuit. 7-4 offsuit, you're just going to drop that. Just going to fold the 4-3 offsuit as well. Ace-4 suited, you're just going to stick that in pre-flop. Min raise is okay. I think I'd probably just stick it in with Ace-4 suited, just because it doesn't perform that well against the wider 3-betting range. You're not getting any advantages by, I think, trying to induce a 3-bet jam there with Ace-4 suited. It's not a bad hand though, I guess, because the kicker's closer to the ace there on the bottom and it's suited. So it does have, it is a valid point to min raise it rather than open jam it. If you had something like A6 offsuit, I would say absolutely open jam pre-flop. Ace-4 suited, I'd still probably open jam there, but a min raise is fine too. Alrighty, looks like you get there. Alright, and we'll just end this one there. We have another probably 15 to 20 minute part 2 video for this coming up next. So we'll just end it here. If you have any questions, go ahead and post in the relevant comments section, whether this is a YouTube 2+2 headsupsingle.com, poker2, or cards chat video. It should be posted just about everywhere. Twitter. Go ahead and just ask in comments if you have any questions about anything. Run good, guys.